Hello everyone, James here. Now, there is an old saying in comedy, timing is everything. Then the same goes with storytelling as well, if you want to hit an emotional button at its peak at the perfect time. I'll explain what I'm getting at in a minute, but this video is going to be dedicated to the return of the character of Timeless Toni Storm on Saturday's episode of AEW Collision. Now, as a quick recap, which I know AEW is rather reversed to at the moment, AEW Collision this past Saturday, Tony Schiavone invited Toni Storm and Mariah May out to the ring for a one-on-one promo face-off. Mariah said that Toni was nothing, and then Toni says that she's Mariah's biggest fan, and then she goes for a hug on Mariah. Then, of course, Mariah attacks Toni, and then whips her with the AEW's women's title. And then after Mariah left Toni laying in the middle of the ring, Toni dramatically grabs the microphone and then says the following.
What makes you think that I've forgotten?
From there, Toni then cuts a monologue before stripping down to her old wrestling attire and then declaring that her amnesia these past 7 or so weeks was all a performance in order to sucker Mariah May in. Or something that, while in character, while performing guest commentary, Mariah didn't actually believe that Toni Storm had amnesia at all, but that's by the by. I think that's the case anyway. Timeless Toni Storm then declares that the hardest part to perform is a role of yourself, and that Mariah witnessed a performance of a lifetime, and that at Grand Slam...
And I'm gonna rip your tits off! She's back!
So the crowd, or sort of what there really was as a crowd, or at least on the, what the camera is showing, there wasn't very many people. There were actually more people in Daly's place on the other side. But that being said, the crowd was very happy and they did a cheer. Now, at first glance, the segment worked out great when you consider the crowd reaction. But when you take a step back and analyse the whole picture, to use a baseball analogy, AEW hit a double when they could have hit a home run if they had a little more patience and paid attention to the little details. And I'm going to tell you how. Now, for those who don't know, Toni Storm hit it big creatively with the Timeless Toni Storm character in late 2023, a silent movie starlet that would only appear in black and white, including during some live promos, which would produce some really, really cleverly done production stuff that I think AEW haven't really equaled since, quite frankly. The odd AEW fan whined about it being too WWE-like, the character, but because, I guess they hate any kind of character developments, but for the most part, it was very, very well received. And 2024 would see Toni Storm, or Timeless Toni Storm, as it were, become one of the faces of the company, even though she was booked as a heel. But she was so popular in 2024, she basically killed every single babyface, including Serena Deeb and Deonna Purrazzo. Is a fine example, quite frankly, en route to eventually turning babyface when she started feuding with her former tag partner and understudy Mariah May. So Toni Storm loses it all in AEW Wembley 2, whatever you want to call that pay-per-view, and then disappeared for 4 months before then returning in December, where AEW decided to give Toni Storm an amnesia angle like Cactus Jack lost in Cleveland in WCW, for those who remember that. Now, Toni would turn up and pretend that she was basically debuting in the company. She didn't know who anybody was. She was excited to be there, and especially she had no knowledge of Timeless Toni Storm or in her entire career in AEW up to that point. This would continue for about 6 or 7 weeks until this past episode's AEW Collision, which brings me to my main point about timing that I referenced at the beginning of this video. The inevitable return of Timeless Toni Storm was always going to be one of the more memorable segments in AEW this year. So why would you shoot one of the biggest segments you could shoot this year on an AEW Collision episode in the middle of the show, where about 1/3 of people are going to watch it compared to AEW Dynamite, especially considering that this episode of AEW Collision was running head-to-head with WWE's Saturday night's main event? Anyway, I thought this was sort of the same thing as Adam Page and Christopher Daniels the week before. They were also on AEW Collision. That feud had been sort of simmering for months, and then all of a sudden, without that much build to it, it's Adam Page and Christopher Daniels on the opening match and a Texas death match full of blood and bad feelings and barbed wire and everything else. And it's just one of those things that just happens. And here's the thing. AEW Collision has been perceived as the B show for over a year, which it is. Tony Khan doesn't want it to be perceived as the B show, but one important segment sort of dotted here, there, and everywhere with very little build to it isn't going to reverse the show's fortune anytime soon. And Toni Storm is no exception. This is all a further indication of a wrestling promotion with national TV that doesn't hold goddamn production meetings before the shows, because if they did, things things like this wouldn't happen. But at the moment, things just sort of happen without thought and due care and attention for the wider implications, or how best to build something to, a pay-per-view in the future, or a big show like Grand Slam, which we're going to get to in a second. And that is unacceptable to me. And that's the other point about timing. The big swerve happened way too early, in my opinion. AEW now have 3 weeks of television to fill with angles leading up to Grand Slam, which is where this big match is going to be happening, now that the big angle has already been shot. My guess is because Brisbane tickets aren't selling very well, AEW feel that they need to sort of bring the Timeless character back early so they can actually advertise the Timeless character, several weeks in advance, because tickets just simply aren't selling. And keep in mind that the Brisbane show, Grand Slam, AEW, that was actually going to be in a stadium originally, and then they weren't selling any tickets, so now it's had to go to an arena. And to make it even worse, they're not even selling that many tickets in the arena. It's a 13,500 seat arena, which probably, when they have all the screens up and everything, it's going to be more like 11,000, and they're probably only like half filling that building up at this point. There's a bit of a kerfuffle with why, but here's the thing, is that now with Timeless Toni Storm and Mariah May, that is 2 matches announced for a big arena show in a foreign country with 3 weeks now left. And that is just, it's obvious to me why they're not selling tickets, and apparently it's not obvious to Tony Khan and the overpaid live event staff who aren't promoting this thing properly. Now, as far as the angle itself, there was absolutely no reason for Toni Storm to get beaten up. Now, Toni's return as Timeless is hardly the most impactful statement of intent when the AEW Collision episode has just aired, and that's what happens. But keep in mind that according to storyline, Toni is pretending to have amnesia, and she has been Timeless Toni Storm the entire time. So for absolutely no reason, Toni Storm let herself get beaten up before revealing she was Timeless, so everything is just a ruse. But she didn't need to take the beating before revealing this. But that being said, that makes absolutely no sense. But they didn't tell the story that Mariah's beating led to Toni regaining her memory. They said Toni just let herself get jumped before being Timeless again. Now, in order to fool Mariah, I guess they were going for sort of like a Terminator thing in that respect. But this could have been done any number of different ways, including what they actually did on AEW Collision. Let's say Mariah May does actually beat up Toni Storm and leaves her lying. And then over multiple episodes, you could have, for whatever reason, let's say the amnesia starts fading away, Toni on the next show can start, hey, I remember, in 2024, I'm sure I've faced you before. I'm sure I've wrestled you before. And then the next week, it could be like, man, I really like these, I remember this outfit, blah, blah, blah. It could be done any number of different ways of her slowly regaining her memory. And then on the big Dynamite beforehand, or whatever it might be, you sort of announce, hey, I'm back. I remember who I am. I'm Timeless Toni. Let's go. I'm me again. I'm ready for you, etc. But the thing is, you do it in such a way that even the most dim-witted fan, domestically or in Australia, can figure out that Timeless Toni Storm is returning to Grand Slam. Plus, you then have weeks' worth of segments built in to every single show that basically write themselves and get fans excited for the inevitable return. So, in my opinion, let's say if we even kept Collision what it was, Mariah beats down Toni Storm, and then she gets back up, she proves herself tough, but then over the next couple of weeks she starts remembering who she is. My opinion is AEW Dynamite, the one before AEW Grand Slam, is the best time to make the big reveal that Toni Storm is now Timeless once again. It is a few days away from the big show. She's finally back to 100%. She's finally herself, or finally the character she's comfortable with and the character that the fans love. And then you have excitement built for the big show instead of just doing it on AEW Collision. Everything is timing once again, everything is pacing, and then the big reveal happens. And to give you an old example, but it's a great example, do you remember back in 2001, it's the Invasion, Stone Cold Steve Austin was being all sad and morose in a bar, knocking around, I think, pool balls on a pool table with his hand, during the initial stages of the WCW Invasion, and he was torn between not wanting to get physical, and then eventually, throughout the course of the episode, he returns to destroy the WCW, ECW Alliance guys to help the WWF guys on that episode of WWF Raw. It built to the Invasion pay-per-view. And needless to remind you, need I say more, that got 775,000 buys. It was such a wonderful build, and it was in a short span of time as well, but it was such a wonderful build, or a wonderful ending story to then lead into the pay-per-view. that it did huge business. And now I do know that obviously any WWF versus WCW Super Show, as that pay-per-view was billed as, and keep in mind that main event was, like, as far as star power goes, the WWF had huge star power with Kurt Angle and Steve Austin, Undertaker and Kane and Chris Jericho. Fit The Rock in there somewhere, it would have been an almost unstoppable sort of star power WWF. But on the WCW side, you had the Dudleys and Rhino, and they weren't. I mean, yeah, the Rhino was main event in ECW like the last year. But, you wouldn't have even had Booker T and DDP if you had the NWO and Scott Steiner and Sting and whoever else you can think of be in those spots. They would have done over 1 million, I'm sure. But the point I'm trying to make is that ending story with Steve Austin coming back and making that great impact at the end. And finally, they've been teasing Austin as returning babyface and being torn about his allegiances to McMahon and whatever else. That they did such a great job of the fans wanting something and then finally delivering it at the peak optimal time, that I swear that could have added 200,000 buys to that pay-per-view. Not that there wasn't enough excitement going into that show as well. Just as a sort of an addendum on that is Stone Cold did actually turn heel at the pay-per-view, and that's what killed off the Alliance storyline for me and probably a lot of other people as well, because it was stupid. Anyway, I am sure there will be some window lickers out there, drooling onto their keyboards that they can barely operate by saying, well, but the fans still cheered and it was great and you just hate AEW. That kind of thing. But here's the thing. I don't hate AEW. I hate suboptimal storytelling. And this is a fine example of it. Once, I said it before, you hit a double, it could have been a home run. It's an angle that was good, but could have been so much tighter, better timed, and once again, more impactful if it had been paced better, and if it hadn't just sort of almost like come out of the blue. One more thing, but this is really nitpicking. Why did Toni Storm address the hard camera for so long before talking to Mariah May? Now, as I say, this is nitpicking, but she's right there. I mean, address her. Don't address the hard camera when the person you're feuding with is right there looking at you and, pointing at you and whatever else. As I say, once again, that's a nitpick, but that's a little production thing that really just bugged me a bit. Toni did turn around and talk to Mariah May at the second half of the monologue, but as I say, I think she addressed the hard camera a bit too much for my taste. Let me know what you thought in the comments if you would, and please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content. I'm trying to build up this channel, and that all helps with the algorithm of building up the channel. So once again, if you enjoy this, I hope to see you again for the next video.